Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep, really deep into the world of African music.
Deep, yes, but maybe with a fun twist.
Right.
We're not just talking melodies and rhythms.
Right. We're talking about music as a language, a way to
Yeah.
communicate. Think drums that talk, horns that send signals across miles.
It's kind of mind-blowing how integral music is to life in many African cultures.
Absolutely. And for this deep dive, we've got two main sources. One is a research paper, very focused on the Busi people of Ghana. Fascinating stuff.
And then we've also got some broader notes on African music, looking at how it's used for communication across different cultures.
Right. So we'll use those to try and understand how this musical communication worked, especially for the Busi. They seem to have a really unique system.
They really do. The Buzis are a great example, because their instruments aren't just about making music for enjoyment, they're tools.
Like tools to literally get a message across. I love that.
Yeah.
And the paper goes into detail on a bunch of these instruments, like the nances.
The Nances, yeah.
There are these metal buzzers, and they're worn, get this, on the ankles or knees during dances. Can you imagine the sound?
Oh, I bet it's incredible, especially during those fast-paced dances they have, like the Solma or the Galib.
It makes you think about how important the rhythm is, how the sound is actually part of the movement.
Exactly. It's not just background music, it's like this driving force. And for the Busi, their dances aren't just for fun, they're deeply meaningful.
Right, so it's like the sound adds another layer of expression, maybe even tells part of the story.
Exactly.
Then there's another one, the ninlongo. This one's iron, and it has rings that are struck to make the sound. Sounds pretty cool, right?
It does.
The paper says it's used in a dance called the yungo, which is specifically to celebrate the end of the rainy season and the harvest.
That's so interesting. It shows you how tied music is to like the natural world, the cycle of life for the Busi. They celebrate the end of the rain with music and dancing.
It makes me wonder what the ninlongo sounds like. Does it evoke a feeling of relief, maybe joy after the long rains?
That's a great question. It probably does. Every instrument, I think, holds this special cultural significance for them.
So we've got instruments for dancing, that's clear. But what about when they needed to be more direct, like sending a specific message across?
Well, I've had instruments for that too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like the mola, which is a fife made from an antelope horn. Imagine that sound cutting through the air.
So we're not just talking rhythm now, they're using different sounds to send actual information, right?
Hmm?
Was this for everyday things or more for special occasions?
Both, actually. They use the mola for war dances, imagine that, to tell stories of battles, and for search and rescue missions.
Wow.
They even used it at funerals for great warriors, so, the mola probably carried a lot of different emotions. The sound must have meant different things depending on when you heard it.
That's so cool. It's like a musical Morse code, but with way more emotion built in. What about communicating over really long distances, like between villages?
Ah, for that, they often use the wea. It's a small wooden fife. And there are actually different kinds of wea.
Oh, so like different wea for different purposes.
Exactly. They'd use them for rhythmic dancing, interpreting sounds, adding to praise, singing, even communication among shepherds.
It's like the Swiss Army knife of instruments. Music just seems to be everywhere in their lives, for every occasion. What about those sadder times, like funerals? Did they have specific instruments for those?
Absolutely. The dope-go. That's another kind of fife, but made of wood. They used it to announce, let's say, things like war dances, funerals, the death of an elder.
So it had this more serious role, but still very important, right? It's interesting, all these instruments are like woven into the fabric of their society,
They are.
marking the big moments in life, happy and sad. Then there's the gulago, which is a double-ended wooden drum. They use that one for funerals too, especially for important people like chiefs.
It seems like every instrument has a specific use, even within the same event.
It does. But, okay, how does this all tie back to music as language? We've talked rhythms and signals, but how did they actually use music to communicate, like complex ideas?
Well, this is where we get to the talking drums. This is really something special. There are certain drums, like the Yoruba Dundun and the Akan Atumpan,
Dundun and Atumpan, okay.
that can actually imitate human speech. They mimic the tones and rhythms.
Wait, are you saying they can make the drums talk? How is that even possible?
It's all about the way many African languages work. They're tonal, meaning the pitch of a word can change its meaning entirely.
So like saying yes in a high pitch could mean something different from yes in a low pitch.
Exactly. And these talking drums, they can copy those shifts in tone It's like they're speaking the language.
That's mind-blowing. So it's not just beating a rhythm, it's like using the drum to make a whole vocabulary, a way to form words. What kind of messages could they get across with this?
Oh, all sorts. Imagine being in a village where the drums are your main communication. You might hear them announcing a community meeting, a warning about danger.
Maybe celebrating a victory?
Exactly. Praising the chief, telling stories about the ancestors. It's amazing.
It's like a news bulletin, but way more connected to history and tradition, right? But hold on, before we get too deep into these talking drums, I'm curious, did they use any other instruments for communication besides drums?
Oh, absolutely. Drums were central, but there were others. Remember the kudu horn we mentioned?
The antelope horn, yeah.
That was like the master of long-distance communication.
hmm
That deep sound could carry for miles across the savannah.
So less about a specific message and more about just sending a signal, right? Like, hey, we're over here.
Right. Hunters used it to stay in contact, herders to call their cattle. Villages could even send warnings if there was danger.
I'm picturing it now, that sound echoing through the wide open landscape. It's incredible how they used what was around them to communicate.
Yeah.
What about for more personal expression or storytelling?
Well, the mbira was often used for that, also called a thumb piano. It's smaller, more intimate.
Oh, the mambira. I love the sound of that instrument. It's so delicate, almost hypnotic, very different from, say, the drums or the kudu horn.
It is, and that's part of its beauty. The mbira is often used to tell stories, to weave narratives through its music.
So it's not just sending information, it's creating a whole experience. Did the Busi use these instruments mostly one at a time, or did they ever combine them?
That's a great question. They often combine them, creating ensembles, like a richer sound, a more complex message.
It's like a whole orchestra of traditional instruments all working together. But from what I've read, it seems like men were the main musicians in these cultures. Is that right?
It's true that men traditionally play many of the instruments in Busi culture and elsewhere, but it's not entirely male-dominated. Busi women use instruments too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have instruments like the sinkasi, sinyasi, and sinyaka, which they use while they're working, like farming or plastering.
So music is part of everyday life, too, not just ceremonies or sending messages.
Exactly. And they often sing while they work, which is supposed to, help them be more productive.
It's just amazing to me how music is woven into every part of their lives. But I have to ask, are these traditions at risk? With all the changes happening in the world, it seems like a lot of older ways are being lost.
It's a real concern, yeah. The paper talks about some of the challenges the Busis are facing. Things like new religions coming in and the focus on Western education.
So younger generations maybe aren't learning these traditions as much.
Sadly, that's the case sometimes.
That's really sad. It's not just music that's being lost, it's a whole part of their history.
It's a huge challenge, but there's hope. There's growing interest in saving these traditions. Organizations like the International Library of African Music, ILAM, they're doing great work.
So they're trying to keep these traditions alive.
Exactly. They record music, collect instruments, interview people to get those stories before they're lost. And events like the Pan-African Historical Theater Festival, PANAFest, help bring these traditions to more people.
That's fantastic. It sounds like there's a real push to make sure these traditions don't disappear. But before we dive into that, I want to go back to the heart of it all, those talking drums. I can't wait to learn more about how they really work.
So the talking drums, when we talk about the Yoruba Dundun and the Akan Atumpan, it's important to remember we're talking about a whole family of these instruments.
Yeah.
Across Africa, you find them.
Oh, interesting. So it's not like there's one talking drum. There are loads, all different.
Exactly. And each one is, kind of tailored to the specific language and the culture it comes from. Really amazing craftsmanship.
Yeah, I can imagine. They're not just like any old drum. They're designed for this very specific purpose to actually sound like words.
Right.
So get technical for a minute. How do they actually do it? I mean, make the drum talk. Is it all in the way you hit it?
It's more than just hitting. It's, you have to understand both the drum itself and the language. Let's take the Yoruba Dundun, for example. That's actually a set of drums, different sizes, different pitches.
Oh, okay. So it's like they all work together.
Exactly, to create a bigger range of sounds.
Got it. But how do they actually make those sounds into words? Like, what does the drummer do?
So the drummer uses a stick, a curved stick, to strike the drum head. The key is in how they control the pressure, the technique. They can change the tone and pitch just by hitting it in different ways.
Wow, so it's really subtle. It must take years to learn to do that well.
It does, absolutely. It's like, learning a language and an instrument at the same time.
Yeah.
The drummer has to know how the tones work in the language, how they change meaning, and then put that onto the drum.
That's amazing. It's like they have a whole secret code going on. What kind of things would they use the talking drums to communicate?
Think about life in a village. You might hear the drums announcing a birth, maybe calling the elders to a meeting, warning everyone if there was danger coming.
Even gossiping.
Maybe. It's like the village intercom system, right?
Yeah.
But so much more expressive than just a voice on a loudspeaker.
It must have been incredible to hear those messages, like the drums announce a baby's been born, that would unite everyone. Or a warning about danger, that must have been scary.
Yeah, very powerful. It's a way of communicating that gets right to your emotions. You feel it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that they could use the drums to communicate over long distances too. How did they make that work?
Well, sound carries differently out in the open. The drummers would use their knowledge of the land, maybe stand on a hill, and they'd use different beats, loud and soft, to send their message.
So it's like Morse code, but with rhythms instead of dots and dashes.
Kind of, yeah. But it wasn't as strict as Morse code. A really skilled drummer could get creative, really weave a story through the rhythms.
Wow, that's a real art form. And historically, these talking drums were pretty important, right? I read somewhere that they were even used in warfare.
Oh, yeah. They played a big role in battles. They
Yeah.
could relay strategies, tell the troops where to move, even try to scare the enemy. It was like their own special telegraph system.
That's so cool. It makes you realize how important these drums were. They weren't just musical instruments. They were like essential to how they lived and fought and survived.
Exactly. And the drummer wasn't just a musician. They were like a historian, a communicator, a strategist, all rolled into one.
Yeah, a very respected position. Okay, so we've covered the talking drums. What about those other instruments, the kudu horn and the mira? We said the horn was used for signaling, but can you give us some examples?
Well, kudu horn, it's just this amazing natural instrument. That long, twisted horn can really make a sound, a deep, booming sound that carries for miles. Imagine hearing that across the plains.
It must have been a little intimidating, like everyone stop and listen.
It was definitely a way to get attention. Hunters used it to keep track of each other. Herders used it to call their cattle. And if a village was in danger, they could sound the horn to warn everyone.
It's like a lifeline, that sound. It could bring people together, keep them safe.
Right, a powerful tool.
And the mbira, that little thumb piano. You said it was used for storytelling, but how did that actually work? Were there specific tunes for different stories?
The Mambira, it's less about sending a clear message and more about, creating a feeling, eliciting emotions. It's often played in a small group, very intimate. And the music, it can be really moving.
So it's not about words, but about the feeling the music gives you. Was it just for entertainment, or did it have other uses?
The Mbira has a spiritual side in many cultures. It's used in rituals, healing ceremonies, even to communicate with spirits. Some people call it the sound of the ancestors. It's very connected to history and tradition.
It's like the music is a bridge to another world. It's amazing how all these instruments, so different, all seem to come back to this connection with nature.
That's a great point. The materials they're made from, the sounds they make, the way they're played, it all shows this deep respect for the natural world,
Mm.
this understanding that everything is connected.
It makes me wonder, are we missing out on something in our modern world? We're so focused on technology, words on a screen. Are we losing that connection, that ability to communicate in other ways?
That's a good question. We talk all the time nowadays, text, email, but are we really connecting? Are we really listening?
Maybe we can learn something from the Busi, from these cultures that used music to communicate. They knew how to use sound to bring people together, to create something bigger than just words.
Exactly. It wasn't just about information. It was about building relationships, creating a community.
It makes you think about how we communicate today. Are we just focused on getting the message across, or are we thinking about the person on the other end, how they feel?
That's the key, isn't it? It's not just what you say, it's how you say it, your tone of voice, your body language, all of it matters.
So how can we get better at that, at seeing those unspoken messages, at really listening?
I think the first step is to just pay attention. Really listen to the world around you, not just with your ears, but with your whole self. Notice those little things. A change in someone's voice, the way they stand, a look in their eyes.
It's about being present in the moment, not letting those subtle cues slip past.
And remembering that communication is a two-way street. It's not just about sending your message, it's about being open to what the other person is saying, even if it's not in words.
It's a reminder to slow down, be present. Really listen. And maybe if we do that, we can find that magic of connection again, that power that communication has to bring us closer together. It's like we forget sometimes. We get so caught up in just getting the information out, we forget that communication is about so much more, about understanding, connecting with another person.
It's like we're focused on the what and we lose track of the why. Why are we even talking? What are we trying to achieve?
Yeah, and maybe if we ask ourselves that more, if we focus on making a real connection instead of just sending data, maybe that's how we can start to communicate better. But I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, those challenges facing traditional music, like what the Busis are going through. You mentioned how religion and Western education are making it harder for younger people to learn these traditions.
It's a really complicated situation. I mean, as the world changes, as cultures mix, sometimes the older ways start to seem, well, out of date.
Right, and maybe younger people are drawn to newer things.
That's natural, I think. But it is sad when these traditions start to fade.
So is there anything being done to try and save them?
People are working hard, yeah. There are organizations like the International Library of African Music, ILAM. They're doing great work. They collect recordings, instruments. They talk to people, to get the stories before they're gone.
That's so important. It's like saving a piece of history.
It is, absolutely. And then there are festivals like Panafest that really help to get these traditions out there in front of a wider audience.
So they're trying to create a bridge between the past and the present.
Exactly. But the real challenge is how you make those traditions relevant to young people today. They're living in a very different world.
It's not about forcing them to live in the past. It's about showing them how these traditions can still be meaningful, even now.
Right. Music, it's a language everyone understands. It doesn't matter where you come from. Music can touch you. It can move you. The challenge is finding ways to connect those old rhythms and melodies to the world today to show how they can still inspire us.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into this amazing world of African music and communication, what's the main thing you want our listeners to think about?
I think it's important to remember that communication isn't just about words. It's about being present, being genuine, wanting to make a connection. It's about listening with your whole self, not just your ears. Picking up on those little things, the tone of voice, the body language, even when someone's not saying anything at all.
It's about being aware, being in the moment, paying attention.
Exactly. And when we study these old ways of communicating, when we see how music was used to send messages, to bring people together, to build communities, it makes you realize just how powerful sound can be.
It really does. So, to everyone listening, go out there and explore the world of African music. Listen to those talking drums, learn about how those instruments were made, maybe even try playing an mbira or a kudu horn. You might be surprised by what you discover, not just about music, but about yourself, about the world around you.
And as you go about your day, listen.
Yeah.
Listen to the city. Listen to the wind. Listen to the sounds of laughter. There's communication happening all around us all the time. We just have to open our ears and listen.
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey. Keep exploring, keep listening, and keep talking. I've said